Hi, this is Dr. Heather with Feather Communications, sharing some information with you today about how to write an absolutely amazing bio. Most of us don't like writing about ourselves, so this webinar is going to give you top 10 tips on how to do that. And at the end, I'm going to go ahead and share some information with you, some questions that you can answer when you're writing your bio, especially if you're really stumped and kind of don't know where to start, okay? So let's get started. So my first tip is to identify your purpose. Why are you writing this bio? Most of us need a bio when we're maybe speaking at an event, maybe when we're writing an article for a publication, or if we're attending an industry-related sort of conference. A lot of times you need to submit a bio, maybe even a headshot ahead of time to give a little bit of information about yourself, to pique the potential audience's interest, and to find out a little bit about you and why they may want to listen to you or read something that you wrote. Another reason that we write bios a lot of the time is for social media. Maybe your Twitter profile, your Facebook business page, maybe even your website. But the thing you really have to consider is who's going to be reading the information. Are they high school students? Are they retired people? Are they the main workforce? Who are they? Because that's who you need to write your bio for. You have to think about what's important to them and think about it from their point of view. What do they want to know about you? They don't want to know your life story. They want to know a couple little tidbits that kind of make you interesting. So you really have to hone the information directly towards that. My second tip is to write it in third-person perspective. So think of this as when you're at the bookstore, if you're still buying actual books, and you flip over the back side of the book and it has about the author or the inside back cover. When Stephen King writes a book, it doesn't say, I like to write mysteries or I like to write XYZ types of stories. It talks about Stephen King. It's from a third-person perspective, so it uses your name, not I, me, we, and us. So when you're doing it this way, it really does make the information sound more objective, okay? The thing is, it depends where this information is going. Now, I know a lot of times when we're writing a bio or even a summary, for example, on a LinkedIn profile, I tend to write that in the first person because I want it to come from me or I want it to come from my client. I want it to be passionate about what they're interested in. So that can be a little bit different. But typically, we do write it in the third-person perspective. So keep that in mind. My third tip is shorter is better. Impressive people have shorter bios. You don't have to include every single detail of your life, of your career, or whatever it is that you're talking about. People have a really short attention spans, and I'm sure most of us already know this. But you really have to take that into consideration when you're writing this bio. So here's just two examples on the slide here where you can see we're talking about Bob Smith, who's obviously somebody that's made up. But we talk about the first bullet point is straight to the point. He won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. He's the head of the science department at ABC University. Great. That's what I need to know. I know that he won the Nobel Prize. Now I probably want to read what he wrote. Or I know that he won the Nobel Prize. I want to go to the lecture that he's giving. Look at the second one. It goes on and on and on. Talks about, 15, 20 years ago, he was working in this particular city. Then he went over here. Now he's studying some other stuff. He gained second place, blah, blah, blah. And I purposely put blah, blah in there because that's what happens in your brain when somebody's reading all of that. It just becomes too much information. So we didn't even get to the point of him winning the Nobel Prize, which is probably the key information. So we want to make sure we put the good stuff in there and make it short and to the point. Tip number 4 is to have different length options. Now, me personally with my bio, I have a kind of a comprehensive bio in a Microsoft Word document, and then I take out bits and pieces as needed. So a short bio is like a sentence or two maybe that could be used as your elevator pitch and maybe on your Twitter profile. You don't have a lot of time and a lot of space to capture the attention of somebody. So we keep it short. A medium bio, which I would say is probably fairly typical, is probably about one paragraph and really covers kind of the need to know. Again, just a really, really high overview, doesn't include every single detail, and frankly doesn't need to. And a long bio, which probably is the most rarely used, could be up to 1 page in length. Maybe if you're applying for a higher up position within an organization, they might ask you for something like this. So that covers the need to know plus the nice to know. So kind of here's the good stuff, the meat. Also, here's some extra additional information that could be helpful to you. Typically, we're not using something like that, but it is nice to have it because if and when it's needed, you do already have it. And the other thing is, like I said, you can easily pull out bits and pieces as needed for different things. Tip number 5 is invert your pyramid. So when you're thinking of a pyramid, we're thinking like this, but think of it flipped. So we really want to put the good stuff first. We want to really, again, capture that attention and talk about the things that are important to the audience. So if you look at these 2 examples, and I did find this online so you can see it cited at the bottom, talks about Bono, which hopefully most of you know is the lead singer of U2, very famous. The first example is Bono likes the color red. And by the way, I don't know if any of this is true or not, but we'll just use this as an example. He likes the color red, especially on Tuesday. He likes to drink whiskey. His friend was named this. They went to the same school. This is his real name, blah, blah, blah. The last sentence is he is best known as the lead singer for the band U2. Well, hello, that's the most important thing for most of us to know about him. So the second bullet gives you a good example. Bono is the lead singer for the rock band U2. Most of us, that's probably all the further we honestly need to read. He is an advocate for many important political and social issues. His real name is Paul Hewson. Okay. So again, keep that in mind. You want to put the meat of it first because that is the most important thing for your readers to recognize. Tip number 6, and this might seem really kind of silly, honestly, but it's start with your name. So when you're writing a bio, you can't automatically assume that the publication, that whoever is reading it is going to automatically know your name or put your name in there. So start with your name. It's kind of like when you meet somebody, you shake their hand, you say, "Hi, I'm Heather," or "Hi, I'm Bob," whatever the case might be. So put your name in the first sentence. Mine would start out, Heather Rothbauer Wanish, blah, 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 etc. Whatever. Depending upon how formal the publication is, depending on how informal maybe the speaking engagement is, you might want to use your whole name. You might want to use, your nickname or just your first name. It really depends. But it really allows your readers and your listeners to know exactly who they're reading or listening to. Names your business quickly, especially if you're an entrepreneur or even if you're working for somebody else. Bob Smith with ABC Company. Automatically, they connect those two together, and that's how you want to be known. So just like when you're introduced to somebody, and there's an example there. In my case, I obviously have an extremely long, sometimes difficult for people to pronounce name. So sometimes I just call myself Dr. Heather because it's just easier for people to remember. And actually at some events, I've actually started ending with, "I'm Dr. Heather with Feather," because people remember that. It's something memorable. But don't forget to start with your name and make sure that it's included in your bio. That's very, very important, especially if you don't know exactly how it's going to be used. All right, this is my favorite slide of this whole entire thing, is add some personality. So readers want to know you, the person. It gets kind of dry after a while, especially if you're kind of reading about different speakers at a 3-day conference. They kind of all start to sound the same after a while, and it gets kind of boring, honestly. So if you can put in a little bit of humor or some kind of unusual information about yourself, sometimes that really can be memorable for people. However, you really need to be careful. We don't want to take your bio and turn it into something silly that people are going to think, what does this person even do? Does she or he even know what they're talking about? So be clever only if it is actually clever. And if you're not sure, ask somebody, ask a colleague, ask a friend, somebody that you know will be honest with you. And I think this is the funniest statistic. Percent of people who think they are clever is 64%, but the percent of people who actually are clever is only 7%. So that's just kind of a funny statistic to show you that a lot of times people think they're being really funny, or like, oh, this is so funny, people are totally going to get it, and like hardly anybody does. So make sure that you're checking with a friend or checking with somebody to say, hey, I'm thinking about throwing this in my bio. What do you think? One of the things that I talk about a lot of times in a bio, especially if it can be a bit longer or if I'm being introduced somewhere, is I say, my family and I live on a rural funny farm. We have 13 pigs, 35 chickens, and 2 turkeys. And yes, I've put sunscreen and shaving cream on pigs. So the funny thing is that people remember that. They remember that I have all these animals running around. Is that the main thing I want them to remember about me? No. But if it gets them to remember me as a starting point, absolutely. So add a little bit of personality, but just make sure that it's still, on the professional side of things and not something, obviously, too, that's going to offend anyone. All right, don't include everything. You can't be a jack of all trades in your bio, and it's not possible to be everything to everyone. So tell the audience what's most important to them and forget about the rest, because they probably don't care, to be perfectly honest with you. So one of the things that I've done several times in the past is I have spoken at the National Resume Writers Association conference. And I know you're all jealous because it sounds very exciting. But this is an example of a bio that I've included with that information. I'm not saying that this is all I've included, but it's the bulk of it, because they don't necessarily care that I have an MBA and a PhD in business. What they care about is that I have the Certified Professional Resume Writer designation, which is a big deal in our industry. And then I've worked with over 1,000 clients. That's what they care about, so that's what I put first, because the other information probably doesn't matter as much. Another example of this, of how you can kind of change that if needed, is occasionally I do some adjunct teaching at several local universities. When I'm doing that, I put my education first, and this is the stuff that goes last, if I include it at all. Because again, when I'm teaching, the educational background is definitely the most important. So kind of think about, again, having that comprehensive document and picking and choosing the things that you know are relevant to your particular audience in those cases. Contact information. If you can, end your bio with your contact details. Now, whatever that means for you, if it's your phone number, if it's your email, if it's your Twitter handle, your Facebook business page, whatever the case might be. If it's in writing, I would strongly suggest, encouraging people to link to you via social media, because that's important. If you're speaking at an event, obviously kind of blabbing all of that information to somebody, they're never going to remember it anyway. So I would tell them to maybe give you a call or hand out business cards or whatever the case might be. But what if they love the article that you wrote? What if they loved speaking to you and you don't give them any way to contact you? That's crazy. You're losing business, you're losing potential connections and business contacts. So make sure that you're putting that information in there, because whatever you can do to make it convenient for people, the better off you are. Absolutely. And my last tip before we go over some general information is to read it and rewrite it. I honestly don't think that your bio is ever complete. It's always changing. Maybe you got a new certification. Maybe you got a new job. Maybe you went through some new training opportunity that's offered in your field. Whatever the case might be, it's always evolving. So just because you write it today doesn't mean that 6 months from now you can't go in there and change it. Maybe there's something significant that happened that really makes you more of a leading expert in your field. You definitely want to include that information. So review it on a regular basis, save it. That's my number one tip. Save it, save it, save it, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. every single time somebody asks you for a bio, because nobody wants to do that. And then it really does save a lot of time in the long term to do this way. And the other tip I would give you is, even if you didn't include, anything sort of funny in it or adding personality, ask a friend to read it and say, what do you think about this? Because it's very challenging to write about yourself. Most of the time people sell themselves short, and we want to make sure that it makes sense to a third party that doesn't know you. So here's just a short review. Know your purpose. Focus on your target audience. Think about what's important to them, because that's who you're writing this for. Use the third person, unless it's appropriate to maybe throw a quote in there or something. You're going to have different bios for different purposes, and that's perfectly fine. Adding some personality can be a great way to get people to remember you. Include your contact information if that's possible for you to do that in that particular setting. And proofread it, and revise it again, okay? It's really important. So I'm going to keep this slide up, but I'm going to talk to you now just about some questions that you can answer when writing your bio, because I get this a lot. So if you're really stumped and think, gosh, I have no idea where to start, one of the questions you can answer, and you can even just put this in a little bullet format until you think of a way to kind of wind it all together, is how long have you worked at XYZ company and what is your job title there? That's an easy one. That's a really easy one to answer. It's very objective. You don't have to think too hard about that. What's your favorite part about working there? I love helping customers. I love it when one of my resume clients gets a new job. Like, there's nothing better to me than that. So that's what I would write in that case. What's your educational background? If education and training is something that's absolutely critical in your field, that's something you could include. Are you from this particular geographic area originally, or where are you from? One of the things I can share is I'm from a small town of less than 1,000 people. If I'm speaking in New York City or a larger metropolitan area, that's something that people remember because it's a very tiny town. If you're not from here, how long have you lived here? Have you lived overseas? Maybe something like that. What would somebody be surprised to know about you? That's kind of adding a little bit of personality to the bio, so maybe think about something there. If you're writing a bio for something that's a little bit less professional, you could maybe include some information about kids, spouse, partner, whatever the case might be. Heather lives with her son and her husband of 16 years in northwestern Wisconsin. Something like that. Not that we're giving out tons and tons of personal information, but knowing a little bit helps you know the speaker or know the writer or know the person that you're hiring to do something for you. What do you like to do outside of work? Maybe you want to include a hobby or two. Maybe you're a runner and you've just completed your second full marathon. Something like that can absolutely be memorable to the people that would be reading this or listening to you. And then one of the things I have included several times, which I think kind of adds a nice touch and does tell a little bit about you as a person, is what's your favorite quote or saying? If there's a quote that really resonates with you and you keep coming back to it in life, that might be something worth including. Those are all extra things, obviously, depending upon what you're writing the bio for. We don't want to overload somebody, but if that's something that you have the capability of including, it might be worth sharing, okay? So my name, my business name, my phone number, and email address are all on this slide. If you've gone through it and you still have questions, you can definitely let me know. I would be happy also to email you the questions that I just talked about, because I know that sometimes it sounds easy, but when you sit down to do your bio, it still becomes a challenge. So I'd be happy to answer them that way too. But otherwise, I thank you for joining me, and I'm so glad that I could give you these tips today. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again, and I will be back with you soon. Bye-bye.